All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us for the Coastal Wetlands Conservation Grant Program webinar this morning. Today's webinar will be recorded and posted online on the Restore America's Estuaries website, as well as our YouTube channel. And we'll also send out a link to the recording to all registrants. So if you missed part of this or want to go back and re-listen to a section, there will be many ways to do that. All attendees have been placed in listen-only mode. If you have a question, please use the question or chat box in your webinar panel, and those are down towards the bottom of your webinar panel on the right-hand side of your screen. So your two speakers today are myself and Chris Darnell. So I'm Lee Habager, and I'm the External Affairs Manager for Restore America's Estuaries. I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. Your speaker and presenter, Chris Darnell, is a fish and wildlife biologist for the Service's Coastal Program. You can, again, enter any questions into the question box or the chat box. And at the end of the slideshow, we will cover as many questions as time allows. So before we delve into this grant program, I wanted to provide just a little bit of background on Restore America's Estuaries. We are a 501c3 nonprofit that leads a national alliance of 10 community-based organizations that are all dedicated to the protection and restoration of our nation's bays and estuaries as essential resources. We also provide a unified voice in our nation's capital to further prioritize these important habitats. You can find out more about us at www.estuaries.org. And now we will get into the presentation. I'll go ahead and turn the screen over to Chris and let him start his presentation.
Okay, thanks, Lee. This is Chris Darnell. Can you hear me all right? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Okay. So this is Chris Darnell, and I work in the Services Coastal Program, as Lee said. And we, this webinar is about the National Coastal Wetlands Conservation Grant Program, which is one of the Service's larger grant programs that supports habitat protection and restoration. The program is co-administered by the Service's Coastal Program and the Wildlife Sport Fish Restoration Program, which are two different programs, and working with our coastal and state partners, coastal state partners and others, the program has protected and restored and enhanced about 360,000 acres of coastal wetlands and adjacent uplands since the program was started. And so I put up the authorities here. The statute that created the program is called CWPRA, the Coastal Wetlands Planning, Protection, and Restoration Act. And that program actually has two different grant programs. One is for just Louisiana, and the other one is for all the other coastal states. So the two grant programs are administered separately, but they're relatively the same size, but the senators that were involved in this legislation were from Louisiana, so they wanted to make sure that they had a significant program for Louisiana. The grants are funded by the Sport Fish Restoration and Boating Trust Fund, which was established by the Wallop-Roe Act in 1984. And these funds come from excise taxes on fishing tackle and fishing equipment and motor boat fuels. So this program is not funded through congressional appropriations. It's funded from a trust fund, and so money is deposited into an account in the Treasury. And so depending on how much money comes in a given year, that's how much money we have to work with. But it doesn't sort of ebb and flow with the budget. So the regulations, the federal regulations, which provide the guidance for the program, are located in 50 CFR 84. And that includes all the sort of definitions and criteria and some guidance in terms of real estate things. It's a little bit dated. Was promulgated in 2001. We need to update it, but most of the sort of the important updates that we have are located in the notice of financial notice of financial opportunity, which comes out annually. So if there are clarifications or things that we need to we need people to know before they apply, it'll be in the NOFO. And then I put down the program website, but that'll sort of appear in various places in the presentation. So that has a lot of information as well. Background information, descriptions of the program, key documents and resources and things like that. So the program was designed to provide long-term conservation of coastal wetland ecosystems, more than 20 years. There's basically the project types are mostly land acquisition or wetland restoration or enhancement. And that's typically what we get. I would say most of the projects are land acquisition or land protection, conservation easements, and some of the projects are wetland restoration enhancement, but that's a minority of the applications. The applicants, the eligible applicants, are state agencies designated by the governor of the coastal state, and that usually is a state DNR or Fish and Wildlife Agency. However, these agencies can act as a proxy for NGOs that are interested in getting a grant to do acquisition or restoration. So sometimes the NGO or the land trust or whoever will provide the match and be the third party, and the state is essentially just submitting the application. And let's see, get back to my cursor. Okay, so start with ineligible activities, and these are listed in the 50 CFR 84, and I would just say this program doesn't do any mitigation, so we can't be really involved with any projects that are involved mitigation funds. If that situation comes up, usually you have to segregate the two projects into two separate projects so that we can only support a portion of the project that doesn't have any mitigation funds. The exception to this is NERDA. NERDA is not mitigation, so therefore we can work with projects that have NERDA funds, and NERDA can be actually used for match for this program. The other thing I wanted to point out here is that projects above the tidal range, usually that's this program is designed for coastal watersheds, and so it's focused on sort of coastal resources. We've had a lot of questions about how far is too far inland, and we're trying to focus on sort of 8-digit HUCs, coastal watersheds, to benefit that, so that the projects directly benefit coastal resources. So as a general rule, we don't do projects sort of above the head of the tide in a river or so, but that distance can vary, obviously, with the topography. So generally, we're going to sort of set our guidance is sort of the coastal watershed, the 8-digit HUC. So the requirements for this are 25. So I should start out by saying that states that have some kind of a land protection, conservation, or open space fund, their match requirement is 25%. And if they do not have such a fund, there's a few states that still do not have any kind of an open space kind of fund, that match would be 50%. There is no match required for U.S. territories except for Puerto Rico, which is a commonwealth, so therefore it is treated like a state. Match can include conserved lands and in-kind contributions. Land as match is land that has been acquired or by the state. Doesn't have to be recently, but it has to be sort of necessary and reasonable for the project. So therefore, we're looking at land that is near the project site or adjacent to the project site. But the value of that land can satisfy the match requirement. And as I said, match can be provided by a third party. Doesn't have to be provided by the state. And funds must be obligated within 2 years of the grant. There's a maximum of $1 million per year for grants. That's not per project. Some projects have different phases and different phases come in different years. That's per year. So typically grants are between, I would say, 400,000 and $1 million. A small grant might be less than 400,000, but that's what we normally see. And 90% of the grant must support conservation activities. Occasionally we have parts of a grant that are for other things besides conservation, and so that has to be limited to just a small portion of that grant. So let me just change slides here. Okay, so this is the evaluation overview of the evaluation criteria. Evaluation favors acquisition or restoration, as I said. Projects must be associated with coastal area, must show a direct connection to coastal resources. Projects are scored based on 13 scoring criteria, which I'm going to go to next. And just in terms of the application itself, that those requirements are in the Notice of Federal Financial Opportunity that comes out annually. So you'll look at that, and that of course includes the 424 package as well as other things, but there are some page limits there for the main part of the application, but that doesn't include appendices. And then so these are some of the sort of the evaluation criteria. I didn't list all 13 because some of them are pretty minor. These are the major ones. So the first one is wetlands conservation. We look at decreasing, stable, and declining wetlands, both regionally and nationally. And that's how the points are based on sort of the breakdown of what the wetlands look like. And those are mapped by the National Wetlands Inventory, and I'm going to talk about that next as well. But that's one of the larger criterions. Maritime forest on coastal barrier islands. This is sort of in the statute. It's also in the guidance, but it was put in there to I think bias some of the or benefit the states that have maritime forest on coastal barrier islands, which happen to be between North Carolina and Texas. These maritime forests is defined as broadleafed forests that occur on barrier islands and along the mainland coast from Delaware to Texas. This natural community becomes established on old coastal dunes that have been stabilized long enough to sustain forests of oaks, hickories, magnolias, and other coastal species. So that's something that you see particularly in North Carolina, Georgia, and somewhat in the Gulf, it's a high value habitat. It's a very scarce habitat, but that was that's something that is one of the important criterions. Then benefits to endangered species, birds and fish, and these are actually three separate criterions there. I just lumped them together, but there's one for threatened and endangered species, one for benefits to birds, and one for benefits to fish. But so those are somewhat duplicative. And then there are points also for having conservation partners besides just the state agency that's submitting the application. So I talked a little bit about the NWI, the National Wetlands Inventory. This is a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service program that maps wetlands around the country, and they have different types of these codes that you see inside the red lines are indicate different types of wetlands. So this is this mapping thing. They have a website, and you can go in there and you can figure out, the wetlands on a particular site and what type of wetlands they are, and include that in the application. But we use the mapper. And we use these codes to sort of determine the status of the wetlands and to score criterion 1. But I put the website down at the bottom. There are also people in the different Fish and Wildlife Service regions that are knowledgeable about this that can help if you have questions about the codes or the status of the different types of wetlands. This is a project example from 2 years ago, and this is a site up in Michigan on Lake Huron, and it was a state park that was had a privately owned parcel that separated 2 portions of the park, and it was I guess an adult family, I believe was the name. But anyway, they were interested in selling, and so the state came to us to get help in terms of purchasing this parcel to connect the 2 portions of the park. And as you can see, the project total is $1.2 million. The Michigan provided $300,000, and they requested $900,000 from the program. But I just wanted to include this to sort of give you a sense of what these projects typically look like. And this is an example of where we obviously was a catalyst for conservation, and we were able to tie this, have this connectivity between these different parts of the state park. This is another project example. This is a river down in Georgia that the state of Georgia has been working on for quite a while, and they've come back for several different grants to purchase land in this corridor. And you can see each of these you can see the different projects and the different dates that they came back. So they're just basically marching up the river, putting the pieces of jigsaw puzzle together to protect this corridor. And some of the, you might be able to notice that we worked with the Marine Corps to acquire some of this land or to buy easements from them. They have a program called REPI, which I'm forgetting the acronym, but anyway, it's a buffer program around bases, and so they have the ability to support land acquisition for conservation, which is very helpful, and their funds can be used as eligible match for this program. So this is just an example of a successful effort by the state where they've been very focused in protecting this river. So this is just some questions to determine whether sort of your project is ripe for a grant, there does have to be some sort of work that has to go on before you apply for the grant. But just to give you an idea of the types of things that you might want to sort of start looking at or pulling together, building a partnership with other conservation partners, and at the bottom it sort of breaks down acquisition. You should have a purchase agreement negotiated. If it's a conservation easement, who's going to hold the conservation easement? Is the state going to do it? Is the land trust going to do it? And the various plans and permits and studies that need to be done before you start a restoration or enhancement project. So this is gives you a sense of sort of the timeline. We go out with a notice of financial assistance in mid-January. The application due date is end of June. The hope is that sort of the applicants will work with our field staff, the biologists in the region, to develop the applications and make them as competitive as they can be. We always encourage applicants to share the drafts early so that we can provide comments and feedback and suggest how they can improve the project. And then it comes in at the end of June. There's a regional review for eligibility. That's just basically a technical review to make sure that the match is okay and that there's no red flags or anything like that. And then it goes to the national review, which is conducted by, or is a panel of Fish and Wildlife Service folks. That's mid-August to mid-October. They meet in October to actually rank the applications and make a recommendation to the director of Fish and Wildlife Service for the grants. And then, barring any delays, the grants are typically announced between mid-December and mid-January. This year, for instance, obviously with a new administration, new director, it's probably going to be there's going to be delays because they're going to want to know what this grant program is, and they'll require all kinds of briefings and things like that. So hopefully we'll be able to, this year we'll be able to start early because it's probably going to take longer than it normally does. Okay, so this is just to kind of give you an idea of some of the things that happens once you get the grant. You receive a notice of financial award, and these are just some of the things that need to get done. And this is pretty standard for any grants that you get from the feds. With land acquisition, you have to get a appraisal that meets federal standards. There's deed restrictions and recordations of easements. Then it's just drawing the money down at the appropriate time, filing the monitoring reports for the final report, and then close out. This slide I included it just to give you sort of an idea of what the funding has looked like. So I think, I'm sorry, this is mislabeled. I think this should be acres. It should not be funding. So this is the acres conserved, and so you can see that it's gone up and down. I believe that the spikes had to do with the sale of forest by forest company or silvicultural companies, selling off their land back in about 10 years ago. Okay, so this chart gives you an idea of how the states have done. Obviously the Washington state has received the most amount of money. That's because they submit the highest number of applications. And so, but California's done well as well. I believe the ones, the states that we have not received applications from include Rhode Island, Indiana, Guam, American Samoa, and U.S. Virgin Islands. Although, no, we did get one from U.S. Virgin Islands. We just haven't, there's been no grants to those states or territories. And this is since the beginning, since 1992. So this, we already looked at this slide. I had a funding slide, but somehow that got screwed up. So the funding, the highest amount of funding that we've had in a year has been 21.5 million. I believe on the low end is, in recent years, has been around 16 million. So it's typically, you have the amount of money that you have available, and then you have some projects that weren't able to go forward. Those are called recoveries, and that money comes back into the fund. And so typically it's between 17 and 20 million is what we have to work with in any given fiscal year. And the success rate, I would say, for these applications is about 80%, meaning that we fund the majority of the projects that come in, about 80% of the project in a given fiscal year, or in a given year. So that's pretty good. And I think that's it. So I'll just take questions. If you want to take the screen back. I wanted to just point out that my email address and telephone number here, as well as Paul Van Ryzen, he's my counterpart in the Wildlife and Sportfish Restoration Program, and then the program website, it's at the bottom.
Great, thanks so much, Chris. We have a couple of questions, so I'm going to let your slide sit up there just for a quick minute while I ask a couple of these questions. So the first is comes from Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and they are curious if a match can be a federal source. A funding match can be a federal source.
No, it can't. It has to be non-federal. With the exception of the REPI program, DOD money from the REPI program, that can be used as match. That's under a separate statute that which I can provide if you want, but it superseded the QIPRA statute. So that's the exception.
All right, great. And then another question that came in. So for other agencies, there are preference might be shown when there are different phases of a project that apply for grant funding. Can you talk a little bit about how project phases are treated through this grant program?
Yes, so I know some other federal grant programs do multi-year grants, and this program does not. You can have multiple phases that come in different years. However, each phase that comes in is treated as an independent project that competes with all the other projects that come in that year. So we don't give any preference to future phases of a project. But I think the application, you'll reference the original project and the overall goals of the project, and I think that helps, generally helps in terms of the review to demonstrate that this is a successful effort, that it's an ongoing effort, and that the state and other partners are invested in the project. And so I think that helps somewhat.
Great, thank you. And then another question we have, can you talk a little bit about how the non-conservation aspects of a project are covered or not covered?
Okay, so yeah, I talked a little bit about that. Occasionally we have, as part of a larger project, there might be a portion of the project that is not focused on conserving resources. So for instance, we've had projects that have requested funding for a footbridge or for signage or for a bathroom type of thing. Well, so the rule is that has to be confined to 10% of the grant amount. So on $1 million grant, that would be obviously $100,000. So, but no more, because the primary goal of this project is to provide is to conserve coastal wetlands and ecosystems. So that's the general rule of thumb.
Great. And can you give us a little bit of background on who the review panel is that will evaluate these applications, grant applications?
Right. So I mentioned that too. We have 7 coastal regions, and the Fish and Wildlife Service has 7 coastal regions. Each of those regional directors nominates 2 people, one from the coastal program and one for the wildlife and sports restoration program, to sit on a national panel to review all of the applications in that year. And so now the system is designed so that it's not just those 2 people. They're going to represent the region at the meeting that I mentioned. However, they share it with other people in the region that are experts on bird conservation, experts on contamination and pollution, experts on fisheries and things like that. So within the region, there's a period of time when we're going through the national review and the applications are being reviewed within the region, and that's when they sort of pass around the application sort of to get some comments from those experts from different programs. And then they take those comments and then they get a consensus, a preliminary consensus score for each of the 13 criteria, and then that's what they bring to the national meetings. They bring those preliminary scores, and then there's an opportunity to sort of update the review panel, answer questions, and then they revise their score to come up with a consensus score for that region, and that's how basically how the process works. But they are Fish and Wildlife Service biologists from the 2 programs that actually determine the final score.
Great, thank you. We also have a question from TNC. They're curious if these funds can only be used for dirt moving and implementation, or can the funds also be used for non-implementation work related to restoration? If yes, is that only for individual projects like design or feasibility, or can those funds be used for restoration planning activities at larger regional scales?
Well, planning is not an eligible activity under this program. Obviously, so there's obviously some of that has to happen, and you can use some of the grant funds to support work that occurred prior to the grant. But as a primary focus of the project, it should not be planning. It has to be sort of planning for a specific project that you are implementing. But as a general practice, it's not designed to support just general conservation planning. I think that answers the question. Obviously, it's not just about moving dirt. That's the restoration portion of it. We acquire land and conservation easements and protect land. So that's there's also you can do education things, but most of the projects are either protection or restoration.
Great, thank you. So those are all the questions that we have, unless anybody types a question in the next few minutes. But thank you all so much for tuning in and listening to Chris, learning a little bit more about this grant program. Hopefully you guys found this helpful, and we'll submit an application next year. Our contact information is here on the screen, so feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call. Chris's information is also there, so if you have any questions, more specific questions, please feel free to reach out to either of us. And then at the very bottom of that slide, again, is the website for the Coastal Wetlands Conservation Grant Program. So with that, Chris, I don't know if you have any wrap-up you want to say, but thank you all so much for tuning in.
No, thank you, everybody, for listening. Thanks.
All right. Have a great day.